The galaxy was vast and full of countless stars, planets, and civilizations, but not every species had the same strength or chance to defend themselves. On a small, distant planet called Valoranine, a gentle and peaceful species known as the Valorians lived their quiet lives. They were a soft and fragile race, unlike many others in the galaxy. Their bodies were not built for fighting. They had delicate bones and thin skin, and even small injuries could be dangerous. Because of this, they had always relied on intelligence, cooperation, and diplomacy to survive. For generations, the Valorians had built a society based on knowledge, science, and trust. They had cities that glittered under the light of their twin suns, with tall, elegant towers that seemed to float above the ground, connected by bridges that shimmered like crystal. Their people spent their time studying the stars, improving technology, and exploring the secrets of their planet. They had no interest in war, no armies, and no soldiers. Violence was something they had only ever read about in stories, a concept distant and foreign to them. For centuries, Valoranine had remained untouched by the galaxy's darker forces. Other civilizations had tried to make contact, and some had even offered alliances or trade agreements. But the Valorians were cautious, only reaching out to those they could trust. Their communications with nearby systems were friendly and polite, and they maintained careful neutrality. Their hope was simple: live in peace, learn about the universe, and avoid unnecessary conflict. Little did they know, this very way of life made them vulnerable. Far beyond Valoranine, in the wider galaxy, there were beings who saw the weak and gentle as easy targets. One of these groups was known as the Kravda, a violent and ruthless raider faction. The Kravda thrived on fear, intimidation, and slavery. They had no care for diplomacy or peace. To them, life was about power, and the weakest worlds were simply resources to exploit. Across countless star systems, they had attacked civilizations, enslaved populations, and left entire worlds in ruins. Rumors of their brutality traveled like wildfire, and very few dared to cross their path. Unfortunately, Valoranine had come to their attention. The planet's wealth of scientific knowledge, peaceful culture, and unarmed population made it an irresistible target. Meanwhile, humanity was living far from Valoranine, on a harsh planet called Earth. Humans were unlike most other species in the galaxy. Their home world was a brutal place where survival was never guaranteed. From freezing winters to scorching deserts, from predatory animals to natural disasters, humans had been forged by a world that demanded strength, resilience, and adaptability. Over time, they had become extraordinarily resourceful, learning to turn their environment into an advantage. This hard evolution earned them a reputation among other civilizations. Humans were known as Deathworlders not because they sought destruction, but because they were survivors in a deadly world, capable of facing challenges no one else could endure. While many species feared humans, there was also respect. Humans had a dual nature. They could be terrifying in combat, but also fiercely loyal to those they considered friends. Back on the planet continued its routine existence, unaware of the looming danger. Valorian scientists worked in their labs, studying the stars and discovering new energy sources. Children played in the sunlit plazas of the cities, and families shared meals, laughing and singing songs that had been passed down for generations. Everything seemed perfect in its simplicity, but in the cold emptiness of space, the Kravda had already set a course for the planet. Their massive ships moved silently, cloaked by the darkness between stars. To the Valorians, this threat was unimaginable. They had no soldiers to defend their cities, no weapons strong enough to fight off a raider fleet. Their greatest tools were knowledge and kindness, virtues that could not stop warships or blast. As the Kravda fleet approached, the Valorians began to sense a shift. Some noticed unusual signals in their communications systems, strange energy readings near their orbit. At first they thought it might be a scientific anomaly, a cosmic storm, or an unexpected meteor shower. But as the readings became more frequent and aggressive, panic started to rise quietly among the Valorian Council. They sent scouts and probes into orbit to investigate, only to detect something terrifying. Dozens of massive armed ships moving toward their world, heading directly for the cities. The Valorian leaders called an emergency meeting. Their council chamber, a gleaming dome in the center of the capital, was filled with worry and tension. Leaders spoke quickly, trying to understand what to do. Their technology was advanced, but their weapons were defensive at best, enough to protect delicate systems from minor hazards, but useless against an organized raiding fleet. Every mind in the room struggled to find a solution. Some argued for evacuation, but their population was large, and moving them quickly would be almost impossible. Others suggested sending messages to nearby civilizations, asking for help, but past attempts had been slow or unresponsive. Neighbors were cautious, afraid to risk involvement in conflict. After hours of deliberation, the council made a decision. They would send a distress signal into deep space, a plea for help from any species willing to listen. It was a desperate gamble. The signal needed to be clear and strong, transmitting their situation and begging for intervention. They encoded every detail they could, explaining that Valoranine was peaceful, unarmed, and facing imminent danger. They hoped that someone out there, anyone, would answer their call before it was too late. Meanwhile, the Valorian people tried to continue their daily lives, even as fear spread quietly through the cities. Markets and plazas were less crowded, families stayed closer together, and children were watched more carefully. The planet's gentle rhythm, so ingrained in its society, began to change under the shadow of fear. Scientists paused their experiments, teachers instructed students on emergency procedures, and the entire population braced itself for a threat it could not fight. The idea of war, once abstract and distant, now felt terrifyingly real. Far from Valorine, the SOS signal traveled across the void, moving faster than light through communication channels designed for emergencies. It eventually reached Earth, where it was intercepted by a deep space monitoring station. Humans at the station were trained to identify unusual signals, but this one immediately stood out. It was a clear call for help, urgent and emotional, but unlike anything they had encountered. The transmission spoke of a civilization in danger, unarmed, and facing annihilation. The humans analyzing the signal quickly realized the situation's gravity. Valorine was not only sending a distress call but begging for immediate intervention. Too many human officers, it was clear. If no one acted, an entire species could be wiped out. The situation demanded attention. There was no time to wait for diplomacy or slow counsels. The decision needed to be made quickly. Humanity had a choice: ignore the call and allow a peaceful species to perish, or act decisively and risk sending a fleet across unknown regions of space. Within hours, Earth's Defense Council convened. High-ranking officers and scientists debated the message's authenticity, the feasibility of a rescue mission, and the possible dangers. Some cautioned that the signal could be a trap or a manipulation by hostile forces. Others argued that Valorine was clearly peaceful and technologically incapable of deceiving them. After intense discussion, the decision was unanimous. A rapid response fleet would be dispatched immediately. Humans would go where no one else could arrive in time. This marked the beginning of a historic moment, one that neither humans nor Valorians could yet understand. On Valorine, the Council and the population had no idea that their message had already reached a species capable of delivering help far beyond what they had imagined. Across the stars, a fleet of human ships prepared to jump into hyperspace, ready to confront whatever danger awaited. The Valorians braced themselves, hoping that someone would hear their cry. Their gentle hearts were full of fear, but also trust that somewhere, in the vast universe, there were beings who valued life and justice enough to answer. The fate of their planet and people rested on forces beyond their control, and somewhere deep in the blackness of space, humanity began its journey toward Valorine, unaware of what they would find, but determined to ensure that when a species called for help, they would not be ignored. As the first warning signs of danger grew on Valorine, the peaceful rhythm of the planet began to shatter. The Valorians, who had always lived in harmony with their world, were suddenly forced to confront a reality they had never faced before, one that involved fear, strategy, and the urgent need to survive. While their scientists and leaders worked tirelessly to understand the approaching threat, it became clear that diplomacy alone could not save them this time. The Valorians had never built armies, never trained in combat, and never thought seriously about defending themselves. Their cities were beautiful and sophisticated but fragile, with shimmering towers and delicate transport bridges, all designed for elegance and efficiency, not resilience in the face of destruction. Their shields, which protected important structures and energy systems, were sufficient to repel natural hazards or minor accidents, but they were no match for an organized, ruthless fleet like that of the Crafter. As the raiders moved closer, these defenses seemed almost laughably inadequate. Panic began to ripple through the Valorian population. At first, it was quiet, subtle. Children asked their parents why they were whispering. Workers lingered longer than usual in public spaces, and traders paused in their duties to scan the skies. But as the danger became more apparent, fear grew into alarm. Families huddled together in their homes, sharing stories of past myths in an attempt to comfort one another. The elders spoke of legends where intelligent and resourceful communities had survived disasters, hoping to inspire calm, but their voices were small against the reality closing in from orbit. In the capital city, the council convened repeatedly, often working late into the luminous evenings, discussing their dwindling options. They debated evacuating as many citizens as possible, but even this proved to be a logistical nightmare. Valorine had millions of inhabitants, and moving them into underground shelters or protected zones would take days' time they did not have. The underground shelters themselves were sophisticated structures designed for natural disasters, but not for war. They could only hold a fraction of the population safely, and not all medical facilities were deep enough to survive an assault at the same time. The Crafter were advancing without hesitation. Their ships moved in precise formations, scanning the planet for weaknesses, preparing for the inevitable strike. They were confident in their abilities. The Crafter had never failed against a defenseless civilization. From their perspective, Valorine was an easy conquest, an opportunity for plunder and enslaving an entire population. The raiders had no reason to show mercy. Their technology, their weapons, and their ruthlessness had allowed them to conquer countless worlds, and they expected Valorine to be just another addition to their tally. The first clashes began near the outer colonies. The raiders deployed small strike teams in rapid assaults, disabling communication relays and energy grids. Panic surged as entire districts were plunged into darkness, leaving the inhabitants vulnerable and confused. People could hear the distant hum of enemy engines and the occasional sharp blast of energy weapons, sounds that were foreign and terrifying. In the middle of this chaos, the Valorian Council struggled to maintain order, knowing that if the people panicked entirely, survival would be impossible. As their cities began to crumble under pressure, the Valorians realized that they had to take more drastic steps. The Council decided to send a desperate SOS into deep space, reaching beyond nearby star systems to anyone who might be listening. It was a long shot, but it was the only hope. They encoded every detail they could: their population, the incoming threat, and their inability to fight back. The message was urgent and emotional, a cry for help from a civilization that had never known war and was now facing the possibility of extinction. Far from the SOS signal raced through the emptiness of space. It crossed hundreds of light years, traveling faster than conventional ships could, until it reached human listening posts on the edges of explored space. Humans, trained to recognize and respond to such signals, immediately identified the transmission as a genuine call for help. The distress was clear. It wasn't a diplomatic message or a test. It was a plea for survival, sent from beings who had no capacity to defend themselves. That humans were shocked by the vulnerability of the Valorians, but they also understood the situation with clarity. If no one acted, this species could be wiped out before any other civilization could intervene. Meanwhile, on Valorine, the situation escalated further. As the raiders advanced, more areas were compromised. The Valorians tried to slow the enemy with technology designed for environmental protection, deploying energy fields to obscure key installations, but the Kravda were experienced hunters, and they bypassed the defenses with ease. It became apparent that nothing the Valorians had prepared would be enough. People began fleeing toward underground shelters and protected zones, carrying what possessions they could, leaving behind centuries of art, knowledge, and culture. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. The Council also began organizing volunteer groups to assist in the evacuation. Even though the Valorians were not trained fighters, they wanted to do something, anything, to protect their people. Groups of young scientists, engineers, and even artists helped guide citizens to safety, barricade entrances, and manage limited supplies. They worked tirelessly, often putting themselves in danger, showing a bravery they had never needed before. Families relied on each other, neighbors helped strangers, and the population discovered reserves of courage that were previously unknown in the midst of this chaos. The first glimpses of the human response were unknowable to the They had no idea that far away, humans were already mobilizing a rescue fleet. Yet the thought of help somewhere in the galaxy, even if unseen, kept a glimmer of hope alive. The Valorians focused on survival, on keeping their people alive long enough for someone to arrive. Every decision was critical: which districts to evacuate first, how to ration food and medical supplies, how to maintain calm among terrified citizens. The tension reached its peak when the crafter began targeting key infrastructure. They destroyed power grids, knocked out energy shields, and even sabotaged transportation hubs, hoping to trap people in the open. Communication between different districts became sporadic and unreliable. Panic threatened to spiral out of control. In response, the Valorian Council had to make rapid, almost impossible choices. They prioritized evacuating vulnerable populations, first children, the elderly, and those with medical needs. Everyone else was instructed to hold defensive positions as best as they could. The Council members themselves moved between command centers, coordinating responses, and doing everything in their power to stay ahead of the raiders. Despite their fear, the Valorians also began to show ingenuity. Scientists improvised defensive measures, using available technology in ways it was never intended for. Engineers reinforced key structures and created decoy energy fields to confuse the raiders. Even civilians contributed, moving quickly to assist with logistics, carrying supplies, and guiding the wounded. Though unarmed and inexperienced, their collective effort began to slow the raiders, buying precious hours for evacuation. And then, just as the Valorians felt that all hope rested on a fragile thread, distant sensors picked up something new. A signal unlike any they had ever detected. It was powerful, purposeful, and unmistakably artificial. Their scanners could not identify the origin immediately, but the strength of the energy indicated a species capable of incredible technological power. The Council could not know who it was or whether they were friend or foe, but it gave them a brief, fleeting hope that someone might respond to their call for help. As the day turned to night, Valorinine's cities were still under siege, but the evacuation continued. People huddled in shelters, listening to distant explosions and the hum of enemy ships. Volunteers and council members coordinated tirelessly, ensuring that as many as possible reached safety. Every decision mattered. Every second was critical. The Valorians knew they could not fight off the raiders on their own, but their determination to survive on their hope that help would arrive kept them moving forward, despite exhaustion and fear. Unbeknownst to them, The humans had already recognized the SOS as an urgent call for rescue. Within hours, a fleet was being readied for launch, while the Valorians fought to keep their people alive and maintain order. Humans plotted a course across the stars, traveling faster than the raiders could even detect. In the coming hours, the paths of these two very different species would cross, forever changing the fate of Velora 9. For now, the Valorians' world was full of tension, uncertainty, and quiet acts of courage. The peaceful planet that had never known war was being forced to endure its first brush with true danger. The Council, the volunteers, and the ordinary citizens alike found strength in one another, discovering resilience they had never needed before. Though they were small and fragile, and though their weapons were useless against the raiders, their determination to survive and protect their people set the stage for something remarkable, something that would change the galaxy's perception of both Velora 9 and the humans who were on their way. In the face of overwhelming odds, the Valorians discovered the first glimmers of hope, the courage to act despite fear, and the realization that sometimes survival depended not only on strength but on the ability to reach out and trust that someone else might answer. The situation on Velora 9 grew more dire with each passing moment. The crafter raiders had advanced to the inner colonies, and the full weight of their aggression became painfully clear. The gentle Valorians, who had spent their entire lives in peace, were now experiencing chaos and destruction on a scale they had never imagined. Their cities, once vibrant and alive, were scarred by explosions, smoke, and the electric hum of alien weaponry. The alien fleet moved with terrifying precision, sweeping through districts and disabling vital systems. For the Valorians, every moment felt like walking on the edge of a cliff where a single mistake could mean annihilation. Families huddled in the shadows of crumbling buildings, clutching each other as they tried to stay quiet. The sounds of battle, the energy blasts, the distant screams, the vibrations of enormous ships landing filled the air constantly. Even those who had thought themselves brave were now trembling with fear. Valorian children, too young to understand war, were forced to see their homeworld consumed by violence. Many cried, others held tight to their parents, and some stood silently, trying to process what was happening. The adults, for their part, did their best to remain composed. Every act of courage, no matter how small, was critical. The Valorian Council continued to make urgent decisions. Their communication networks had been partially restored, but the raiders had already sabotaged many systems, making coordination a constant challenge. Volunteers moved through the city, guiding civilians to underground shelters, rerouting energy to protective domes, and improvising barricades from debris. Every resource was stretched thin. Despite their fear, the Valorians demonstrated resilience that astonished even themselves. They had never known the need to fight, yet they adapted quickly to survive. The crafter, in contrast, showed no hesitation. They began rounding up the Valorian population with ruthless efficiency, separating families and preparing them for transport ships. Entire districts were cleared with little regard for resistance. The raiders did not expect the Valorians to fight back, and any attempt at defense was met with overwhelming firepower. Panic threatened to become uncontrollable, and the Council realized that their efforts to delay the raiders might not be enough. Every second counted, and the margin between survival and disaster was razor-thin during this chaos. The Valorians attempted one final act of communication, a last message to any potential saviors. They encoded their location, the number of civilians still trapped, and a heartfelt plea for help. This message was different from the earlier SOs. It carried desperation, fear, and a quiet hope that someone, somewhere, would respond. It was an acknowledgement that their fate depended not on their own ability to resist, but on the arrival of allies strong enough to confront the raiders. As the raiders moved deeper into the cities, the first real signs of Valorian resistance emerged. Scientists, engineers, and volunteers used whatever technology they could adapt to create obstacles. They deployed decoy energy fields to confuse enemy scanners, rigged automated systems to slow the raiders, and improvised barriers to protect vulnerable civilians. Though these measures could not defeat the crafter, they bought critical time for evacuation. Valorians showed ingenuity and courage, working in small teams to coordinate movements and save lives. Even without weapons, their intelligence and teamwork created small victories in the midst of overwhelming threat. Then, in the midst of desperation, something remarkable occurred. Long-range sensors detected a massive fleet approaching from the distance. The readings were unlike anything the Valorians had ever encountered. The ships were enormous, well-armed and moving at a speed that defied normal expectations. The energy signatures indicated not only strength but also advanced technology far beyond the capabilities of the raiders. Though they could not know the identity of this fleet, the Valorians sensed that salvation might finally be arriving. The crafter, however, had no idea what was coming. They continued their assault, confident that Velora 9 would fall quickly. Their overconfidence would soon prove to be a fatal mistake. As the alien fleet entered the system, it dropped out of faster-than-light traveling formation, each ship poised for immediate engagement. The humans, known across the galaxy as Deathworlders, had arrived. Their approach was deliberate, calculated, and terrifying. Every vessel was a fortress of advanced weapons, reinforced armor, and strategic design built for maximum efficiency in combat. From the surface, Valorians watched the skies with awe and disbelief. The ships descended, large enough to blot out sections of the sky, their hulls gleaming under Valorani's suns. For the first time in their lives, the Valorians saw beings who were clearly capable of defending them. Fear was replaced, at least partially, by a fragile hope. They did not yet understand who these newcomers were or what they were capable of, but they knew that help had arrived. The humans' first action was clear and deliberate. Captain Mara Holt, commanding the lead ship, issued a single warning to the crafter: withdraw immediately, or face destruction. The raiders, unaccustomed to being challenged by such overwhelming force, initially laughed, assuming this was a weak species making an empty threat. But the humans did not hesitate. Within minutes, the battle erupted. The engagement was swift and precise. Human ships moved with synchronized perfection, their weapons targeting raider ships with surgical accuracy. Shields collapsed, engines were disabled, and key command vessels were neutralized. The crafter were caught off guard. Their overconfidence turned to confusion and then panic as the humans dismantled their formations systematically. Explosions rocked the battlefield, and energy beams lit the sky above Valorani. The humans did not simply attack, they executed a calculated, strategic operation designed to minimize civilian casualties while eliminating the threat. On the ground, Valorians watched in disbelief as the tide turned. The humans' assault forced the raiders to retreat in disarray. Transport ships were captured or destroyed before they could evacuate the population. The automated systems, barricades, and clever obstacles created by Valorians now had their full effect in slowing enemy movements, giving the humans time to strike decisively. Families huddled in shelters could hear the hum and thunder of human ships above, a sound that became a symbol of hope. Valorian scientists and engineers, still in their underground facilities, began assisting the humans as best they could. They provided maps of the cities, locations of civilians, and information about the raiders' movements. The collaboration was instantaneous, even without prior communication protocols. Humans, trained to adapt and understand other species quickly, used this information to optimize their rescue operations. Every Valorian life saved reinforced the human fleet's precision and efficiency. Amidst this chaos, the first real human ground teams landed, clad in reinforced armor and equipped with advanced weaponry. They moved with purpose through the streets of Valorani. Their objective was clear: neutralize any remaining threats, rescue trapped civilians, and restore order. Valorian volunteers guided them through damaged areas, showing paths to the underground shelters and pointing out areas where raiders had set traps. Though small and fragile, the Valorians played a critical role in ensuring that the rescue was successful. As the crafter realized that their fleet was being systematically dismantled, desperation set in. They attempted to regroup and strike back, but human coordination, superior firepower, and strategy were too overwhelming. Command ships were disabled, raider formations collapsed, and retreat became the only viable option. Within hours, the threat that had seemed unstoppable was eliminated or neutralized. The humans had turned what looked like certain defeat into a decisive victory, saving the Valorian population from near-certain annihilation. During this critical moment, Valorians began to grasp the scale of what had just occurred. They had never known violence, yet they had witnessed a battle unlike any in their history. But unlike the raiders, the humans fought with a specific purpose: to protect and rescue, not to conquer. Civilians who had been trapped or hidden in shelters emerged slowly, blinking in the light, bewildered but alive. Families reunited amidst the ruins of their neighborhoods, tears mingling with laughter, as they realized the extent of their salvation. The Valorian Council, overwhelmed by emotion, finally had a moment to breathe. Their people were safe, and the raiders were gone. They began to communicate with the human fleet, asking questions, expressing gratitude, and trying to understand the beings who had come to their aid so decisively. Captain Holt and her officers explained their purpose simply. They had answered the SOS because no civilization should be left to fall without a chance. That night, Valorani was quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet one filled with relief, awe, and reflection. The city lights flickered back on as humans assisted in stabilizing energy grids and repairing key infrastructure. Valorians moved carefully through the streets, helping wherever they could, amazed at the humans' efficiency and care. In that moment, they began to understand a fundamental truth. Strength was not only about fighting ability, but also about the willingness to protect others in need. For the first time, Valorians felt a sense of safety and hope they had never known. The raiders had been defeated, and the humans had shown them that even the most powerful threats could be overcome when courage, skill, and determination were combined. It was a lesson that would stay with their species forever. A reminder that in the vast and dangerous galaxy, allies could appear when least expected, and that sometimes salvation came from the most unlikely of places. After the intense battle and critical moments of chaos, Valorani began to experience something it had never known before: returning to a world on the edge of disaster. The human fleet, having neutralized the crafter threat, began the careful process of stabilizing the planet and ensuring the safety of every surviving Valorian. What the Valorians witnessed during these hours was nothing short of astonishing. For a species that had never seen combat, the humans' efficiency, discipline, and unwavering focus were on. Every move was deliberate, every action had a purpose, and every life mattered to them. The first priority was the rescue of civilians who had been trapped in the damaged districts. Buildings that had been partially destroyed during the raids were carefully approached by human teams. Specialized units moved through rubble, using advanced scanning devices to locate survivors. These teams operated with precision, lifting debris, securing unstable structures, and guiding frightened civilians to safe zones. The Valorians, watching this, felt a mixture of relief and wonder. They had never imagined that beings could act with such speed, skill, and care under the pressure of life and death situations. As the last pockets of resistance were cleared, human ground teams began organizing evacuation routes. They set up temporary shelters equipped with medical facilities, food supplies, and communication arrays. The Valorians who had taken refuge in underground bunkers were carefully escorted to these safe zones. Children, the elderly, and the wounded were given priority, with medics attending to burns, fractures, and shock. The atmosphere was tense, yet orderly. Unlike the chaos of the previous days, this operation had a calm efficiency. Even the Valorian Council, which had been overwhelmed with fear and uncertainty, that could now begin to breathe, seeing their people moved and cared for with such expertise. In addition to rescuing civilians, the humans also worked to secure critical infrastructure. Energy grids, transportation networks, and communication hubs were repaired or reinforced. Valorian engineers, who had been struggling to maintain these systems under constant attack, worked alongside human teams, learning new techniques and witnessing technology far beyond their understanding. Where once their shields had seemed inadequate, the humans deployed temporary force fields and energy stabilizers, providing protection against residual threats and potential aftershocks from the raid. Slowly, the cities began to regain their functionality, lights flickering back on, public systems restoring, and a sense of normalcy returning. Though mostly destroyed or forced to retreat, had left behind remnants of their assault. Mines, energy traps, and damaged machinery littered the streets and outskirts. Human teams systematically disarmed these hazards, preventing further casualties. Each action was methodical, ensuring that civilians could move safely and that no hidden dangers remained. The Valorians observed these actions with growing admiration for a people who had lived their lives without needing to fight or even defend themselves. The demonstration of skill, bravery, and consideration was both humbling and inspiring. During this period, the Valorian Council began interacting with the human command. Captain Mara Holt and her officers provided updates on rescue operations, coordinated logistics, and advised on rebuilding strategies. The humans did not impose their authority but worked collaboratively with the Valorians, respecting their customs and knowledge of the planet. This approach helped the Valorians regain a sense of agency after the terror of the raids. They were no longer just passive recipients of aid, they were active participants in restoring their civilization. Medical teams, both human and Valorian, worked tirelessly to care for the wounded. The scale of the injuries was overwhelming, but humans brought advanced medical technology that accelerated recovery and treated conditions previously thought untreatable. Broken limbs were stabilized with reinforced materials, burns were treated with rapid healing compounds, and trauma care was administered with precision. Valorian doctors, who had been trained in their own peaceful medicine, learned new techniques and were amazed at the speed and effectiveness of these treatments. The collaboration not only saved lives but also created a bond between the species, built on mutual respect and gratitude. As order began to return, humans also focused on psychological recovery. The Valorians, traumatized by the sudden invasion and near destruction of their homes, were offered counseling and support. Special units were trained to communicate across species, providing reassurance, helping with grief, and ensuring that the citizens could process the events they had endured. Children, in particular, received attention, with human personnel organizing activities to help them regain a sense of safety and routine. These acts were subtle but deeply impactful. The Valorians were beginning to understand that humanity's strength was not just in their weapons, but in their ability to care, protect, and restore hope. In parallel, the Valorian scientists collaborated with human engineers to assess the damage caused by the raiders and to develop long-term solutions. This included rebuilding energy grids, reinforcing city structures, and implementing advanced defense systems. The humans provided designs and technologies that allowed Valorine to prepare for future threats, not by becoming a warlike species, but by creating safeguards that preserved life and culture. The council members were deeply involved, ensuring that the solutions aligned with Valorian values and aesthetics. Even amid destruction, the planet's beauty was preserved and enhanced. Blending advanced technology with the elegance of their cities, the humans did not linger only on repairs. They also helped to secure Valorine against any remaining or returning threats. Patrols were established, and reconnaissance systems were put in place to monitor the skies for hostile movement. Though the Valorians had never trained for war, they now had allies capable of defending them. This knowledge provided a sense of security that was entirely new to their species. For the first time, Valorians could believe that their peaceful way of life could continue without fear of annihilation. Amid these actions, small moments of human kindness became legendary among the Valorians. Soldiers helped children find lost family members. Engineers assisted elderly citizens in navigating damaged streets. Medics carried civilians through dangerous zones, often at great personal risk. Every act, no matter how minor, reinforced the idea that these visitors were not just warriors, they were protectors. The Valorians, who had long believed that survival depended solely on knowledge and caution, were learning a new lesson. Strength combined with empathy was a force unlike any other. During the days that followed, the Valorian Council began formal interactions with the humans, trying to understand the species that had saved them. Captain Holt explained simply. They had acted because Valoranine had called for help, and no civilization should be left to fall without aid. The Valorians were struck by the simplicity and clarity of the answer. Unlike the crafter who acted for power or profit, the humans had acted for justice, life, and moral duty. This distinction left a profound impact on Valorian culture, inspiring a new understanding of what strength could mean. In the final stages of the resolution, Valorians began returning to their daily routines, cautiously rebuilding the normal rhythms of life. Markets reopened, schools resumed, and families returned to their homes, guided by human teams ensuring safety. Though scars of the attack remained, burned buildings, destroyed streets, and emotional wounds, the planet was no longer under immediate threat. Every action taken by humans had not only protected lives but also reinforced the idea that survival and recovery were possible. Even after devastation, by the time the human fleet prepared to leave, Valoranine had transformed. The planet was no longer simply a peaceful world at risk. It was a society that had endured unimaginable terror, witnessed extraordinary courage, and survived because of the intervention of a species whose strength and heart were unmatched. The Valorians, now filled with gratitude and awe, began to see their future differently. They understood that alliances, trust, and shared courage were just as important as intelligence and technology. Captain Holt's departure was marked by ceremony, not as conquerors but as honored guests. The Valorians presented gifts, symbols of gratitude, and messages of respect. The humans accepted quietly, emphasizing that their actions had been duty, not heroism for recognition. Yet the Valorians could not help but see the profound significance of what had occurred. A species forged in hardship had saved theirs from extinction, proving that compassion and strength could coexist. By the end of this phase, Valoranine was safe, its people alive, and its future secured. The human fleet had completed its mission with precision, care, and honor. The Valorians began the long process of emotional recovery, reconstruction, and reflection, aware that their society had been changed forever. They had faced the unimaginable and survived, not through their own strength alone, but through the intervention of beings who combined the harshness of survival with the nobility of protection. For Valo, the lesson was clear. Survival is not merely about avoiding danger, but about recognizing allies, trusting in the courage of others, and embracing the strength that comes from collaboration. That humans had shown them what was possible when power was tempered by empathy and skill was used to protect rather than destroy. In the days and weeks following the human intervention on Valoranine, the planet slowly began to heal. The destruction left by the crafter was significant, but it was no longer a source of fear thanks to the humans who had risked everything to save them. Valorians cautiously ventured out from shelters and safe zones, stepping over rubble and debris, witnessing their cities slowly returning to life. Streets that had been silent and empty for days were now filled with the sound of activity, people rebuilding homes, repairing infrastructure, and caring for the wounded. The air, once thick with smoke and panic, was now filled with cautious optimism and a renewed sense of community. The Valorian Council took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. For generations they had lived in peace, relying on knowledge, diplomacy, and careful observation to maintain stability. They had never imagined that their civilization could be threatened by force, and they had never imagined a species so powerful, so decisive, and so compassionate could exist in the galaxy. Humans had shown them that the universe was not only a place of danger but also a place of possibility, where beings could rise above violence to act with courage and mercy. The people of Valoranine began rebuilding their homes, slowly but determinedly. Families returned to houses that had been damaged, cleaning, repairing, and reconstructing what had been lost. The children, who had spent days in fear, began to explore the streets again, playing cautiously in spaces where the humans had cleared debris. The elders, who had watched their world teeter on the edge of destruction, now guided their communities with renewed hope. There was a shared understanding that the planet had survived not just because of human intervention, but because the Valorians had acted together in courage and ingenuity during the crisis. Their combined effort with the humans had made survival possible. Rebuilding was not just physical, it was emotional and cultural. The Valorians held gatherings to commemorate the lives saved and to mourn those who had been lost or injured. Storytelling became an important part of recovery. as people recounted the bravery of volunteers, the precision of the human fleet, and the moments when hope had seemed almost lost. These stories, passed orally and recorded in writing, who became part of the cultural memory, teaching future generations about courage, cooperation, and the value of allies. Scientists and engineers worked side by side with the humans during this period, not just repairing damage, but improving the planet's systems. Energy grids were strengthened, transportation systems rebuilt, and new technologies integrated into city designs. Unlike the Kravta, who were destroyed without reason, the humans' influence helped Valor-9 evolve. The Valorians learned to blend their own knowledge with human strategies, creating systems that were more resilient, efficient, and capable of protecting life without compromising the beauty of their world. It was a delicate balance, but one that would serve them for generations to come. The impact on the Valorian people was profound. They had faced a species designed for brutality, survived unimaginable terror, and witnessed a rescue that combined overwhelming strength with compassion. For many, this experience transformed the way they viewed the universe. The galaxy was not just a place of distant stars and neutral civilizations. It was a place where bravery, intelligence, and empathy could intersect, where those willing to stand up for others could alter the course of history. Among the Valorian children, the human intervention became a source of inspiration. They asked questions about the humans, about how a species so different from themselves could act with such courage and skill. Schools incorporated these lessons into their teaching, using the events to explain the importance of collaboration, trust, and moral responsibility. Children drew pictures of the humans descending from the sky, rescuing families, and defeating the raiders. Even though many had not fully understood the battle, the emotional truth of the events, the hope, fear, and ultimate relief was clear to them. The Valorian leaders, in their council chambers, reflected on their own actions as well. They had been unprepared for war, yet they had found strength in organization, ingenuity, and courage. Volunteers had risked their lives, citizens had followed instructions under extreme stress, and the scientists and engineers had adapted technology to protect others, while the humans had provided the decisive power to defeat the Kravta. The Valorians had played a critical role in ensuring their people survived. It was a lesson in humility and gratitude, but also in self-realization, the understanding that even a peaceful civilization can rise to challenges if united by purpose and hope. As the human fleet prepared to depart, the Valorians gathered to offer thanks. Captain Mara Holt and her officers were recognized not as conquerors but as protectors, guardians who had entered a world in crisis and acted decisively to preserve life. The Valorians presented gifts, symbols of gratitude, and messages of respect. The humans accepted quietly, emphasizing that their actions had been duty, not heroism for recognition. Yet the Valorians could not help but see the profound significance of what had occurred. They had been saved by a species who combined the toughness of survival with the nobility of protecting others. In the weeks following the departure of the human fleet, Valor-9's society began to integrate the lessons learned. Emergency protocols were revised, communication systems improved, and disaster response strategies became a part of daily life. Though the planet remained peaceful, there was a new awareness that threats existed beyond their understanding, and that alliances could be vital for survival. For the first time, the Valorians actively sought relationships with other civilizations, inspired by the humans' example. They understood that interstellar cooperation could prevent catastrophe and protect life in ways previously unimaginable. The emotional impact on the Valorian population lingered. Adults recounted their experiences repeatedly, sharing stories of the fear and despair they had felt, and the awe and relief when humans arrived. Survivors who had been trapped or injured told of the bravery of rescuers, the precision of their actions, and the kindness shown even in the midst of war. These accounts became part of the planet's oral history, creating a collective memory of a turning point in their civilization. The trauma of the raids remained, but it was tempered by hope, courage, and the knowledge that help could arrive when needed. The Valorian children, inspired by the humans, began to aspire to new goals. Many imagined themselves traveling to distant stars, learning from other civilizations, and exploring the galaxy in ways that were previously only dreams. Their curiosity was fueled by the knowledge that beings from far away had come to their aid, proving that the universe was full of possibilities and allies. The adults encouraged this curiosity, recognizing that a sense of wonder and ambition was vital for the planet's long-term growth and resilience over time. Valor-9 began to establish formal communications with other species. The events of the Kravta attack and the human rescue had changed the way neighboring civilizations perceived the planet. What was once considered a fragile, isolated world was now seen as a society capable of collaboration, resilience, and innovation. The Valorians, once cautious and hesitant in their diplomacy, now approached interstellar relationships with a new confidence, guided by the example of the humans who had saved them. The bond between humans and Valorians, though separated by light years, became enduring. Messages of friendship, respect, and gratitude were exchanged. Valorian scientists and engineers continued to collaborate with human counterparts, sharing knowledge and learning advanced technologies. Cultural exchanges developed, and the story of the rescue became a shared narrative across both species, a tale of courage, cooperation, and the importance of standing up for others in times of need. In reflecting on the events, Valorians realized that their lives had been forever changed. They had learned that peace does not mean passivity, that strength is not only physical but also moral, and that hope can arrive in unexpected forms. The humans had demonstrated that survival and justice could coexist, that it was possible to wield great power responsibly, and that choosing to protect others was an act of true heroism. That's time passed. Valorine rebuilt fully, but the memory of the human rescue remained vivid. Festivals were held to commemorate the day the humans arrived. Schools taught the story as part of history, and children grew up knowing that a distant species had come across the stars to save them. This event became a cornerstone of their cultural identity, a moment when the universe had proven to them that hope and courage could triumph even against overwhelming odds for humanity. The mission was simply a response to a call for help, but for the Valorians, it was transformative. It reshaped their understanding of power, morality, and the potential for cooperation across species. They had survived an impossible threat, not through violence or aggression, but through the intervention of a species whose strength was matched by empathy, skill, and honor. In the end, Valorine stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal. The scars of the Crafter attack remained as reminders of the past, but they were balanced by the lessons of survival, courage, and interstellar friendship. The Valorians had faced destruction and found not despair, but hope. They had learned that the universe, though vast and dangerous, also contained beings willing to act decisively for the protection of others. And in this lesson, they discovered a vision of the future, a future in which cooperation, courage, and compassion would guide their civilization as it moved forward into the stars.